Coming up on today's edition of the Art Marketing Podcast, one image, 45 mediums, 10% more every year. This is what print on demand can do for an art business. Specifically, we are continuing on with the classics, which is a series I started last week. And today we are going to cover POD. POD stands for Print on Demand, the deep dive. And I'm going to start with some established masters, which I think will be really interesting. It's not something I've done. And then ideally end with you. Now, in 2018, a guy you probably never heard of, in a Texas town of 87 people, sold a single painting for $141,500. The most interesting part is what he did with the same image after that. And we're going to get there, so stick with me. I used to say this all the time on my webinars. Why part and parcel of why I'm going back to the classics is because I realize I never really released some of this stuff on the podcast, and it's good and it's important. And so let me ask you a question. If I hired you, a hypothetical if you like, if I hired you to sell knives for me, door to door, this was your new job, when you went knocking on those doors, what would you have in your hands? What would you actually take with you to knock on the door to try and sell knives? You'd have the knives, right? Because if you didn't, you would have to be a pretty doggone extraordinary salesperson to be able to sell those from a catalog, to be able to sell those off of a photo of the knives, or look at this pretty picture. And most of us are just not that good at persuasion. Okay, we are just not. So today's episode in one line, print on demand and samples are not two topics. They're one engine. And the artists and photographers that understand this, that are doing this the best, are running it all the same way, whether they sell a piece for $25 or $317,000. And this is what you need to be doing too. This is what you need to be doing too. And I figured I would start this one out with, a bit of a question, a bit of an observation. Okay. You're either a hobbyist or you have a business and you have to pick one. That's it. That's really it. There are artists and photographers creating art and photography, beautiful photography as hobbyists. And that is awesome. And that is all good. And there are artists and there are photographers that are running art businesses and photography businesses. If you fancy yourself in the latter group, it makes sense to study those who are doing it extremely well and have huge businesses that are making a ton of money to do it. And it doesn't mean that there is any one path that works for every single solitary creative business. Quite to the contrary, everyone has the ability to do them. To do that way that they want to do it. But if you're trying to make a living for your craft, okay, from your God-given talent to create and what you're capable of creating, you got to keep listening to this, okay? You got to keep listening to this. And another used concept was like the drain, right? And I found throughout my career and all these conversations I've had with artists and photographers that your drains end up getting clogged with what I believe to be nonsense. Okay, these stupid notions that get clogged in the drain and then no water can escape and the drain starts working. And how these things get stuck in the drain is a myriad of reasons. Okay, but my job is to help you unclog that drain so everything can just be flowing nice and smoothly, right? And the examples in this case of things that get stuck in the drain, that as an artist or a photographer, you can't or shouldn't run a business. That as an artist or a photographer, somehow the rules don't apply and you don't have to run sales or marketing campaigns. That as an artist or a photographer, you don't need to do active marketing, that somehow you will just be magically discovered for being an incredible creator, right? That as artists and photographers, you can't be perceived a certain way, right? There's like this fear of looking like a salesperson or a tchotchke shop or whatever. This notion that you can't ever discount your work, which is the biggest bunch of BS in the history of mankind. More artwork is sold at a discount in the gallery world than anywhere else, right? And it's not even to say you have to discount your work. It's just, these are the things that get stuck in the drain. And all of these nonsensical things that we've heard in this industry for time immemorial gets stuck in the drain, and it prevents the aforementioned hobbyists from ever turning their creations into a business. And pretty much everyone that listens to this wants to have a business. Pretty much everyone that signs up at art storefronts wants to have a business. Pretty much just about every artist I've talked to, aside from the offhanded social media comment here or there, I'm not selling anybody my art. I'm just creating it for the world, right? Pretty much everyone does. You all do, right? And when I think back to the whole art school, art history classes, MFA classes, photography classes, take your pick, right? When you're studying or learning art history, you're going to study Van Gogh and Renoir and Cezanne and Kandinsky, etc. You're learning photography. It's going to be Ansel Adams and Louis Hine and Henri Cartier-Bresson or Stieglitz or Richard Avedon, right? You learn from the masters. And that's how every art class on earth works. You got the periods, you've got the masters, what sets them apart, what makes them interesting, what makes them amazing, right? And I totally agree with studying the history, and I love the history. I took a ton of those classes in college myself. I've read a ton of books on them because I find it fascinating. Everyone that's had an education, okay, in art, in photography, in creativity, always learns from the masters, right? So why wouldn't we study the masters in business as it applies to art? Why wouldn't we understand the masters in business as it applies to photography, right? We're trying to have a business, and we're trying to get paid the most that we can for our creations to live the lives that we want to live. Why does no one ever study the masters of business, right? Why do we never do that? And there's a reason, by the way, that your art or your photography school never taught that, but I will come back to that in a second. So I cherry picked 2 masters today, okay? And, if there can be masters that are appreciated for their craft, the history, the era, my premise is really that there can be masters that we can appreciate for their business acumen, their gumption, their ability to buck the norm, treat the creative giftings as an opportunity to fund their lives and have art careers while they are still alive, okay? That's like one of the other things in the drain. Oh, another artist that only got famous after they died. Such BS, right? So I cherry picked 2 that I've talked about on the pod before. And I kind of did some deep dives. I've got books on some of them. On some of them I had to read a bunch of articles, and I did some in-depth dives on their websites. Okay, and I picked a photographer, I picked an artist. And for the photographer, I picked Gray Malin. Okay, and my wife loves Gray Malin. We have a Gray Malin print in our house. She's been a fan of him forever and ever. And I think most people would probably know him as he's popularized what are sort of look like drone shots of beaches. People sitting on the beach with the umbrellas, sometimes swimming pools. And while I'm sure he uses a drone to achieve all of those incredible images in today's day and age, I think when he did it, he actually started out in helicopters primarily to get all of them. And his story is really, really interesting. So he started in 2009 in the middle of a recession, the single solitary hardest time to start a business. And the first thing he did trying to sell his prints were selling at a flea market in Melrose, in West Hollywood. Right? He did the road and show thing, started out tiny little booth, tiny little table, his prints, and saw how he could go. And, his story goes on that he cold emailed 1,000 print buyers from a beach trip, one of which was Kings Lane or One Kings Lane. And that is a huge breakthrough, and he got into that store. And in the 16 years he's been in it, he's got a New York Times bestselling book called Beaches that he released in 2016. They don't publish data when you have a private company, but I believe most people think his business does anywhere from like $25 to $45 million a year. It could be more than that. Usually those estimates are significantly under what the artist is actually doing. But I took the time to go ahead and check out his site, right? And I used all my fancy little AI tools, so I was able to scan his entire sitemap, look at all of his unique products, see how many collections he has, right? And how he is running his business. Presumably, a guy that has been this successful, okay, in the, what did I say it was? What do my notes say? 16 years that he's been in it, okay? And if we go back to last week's episode, 16 years left was at like the bottom of what most of you guys have. Most of you guys have 20, 30, 40, 50 years or 60 years left to keep cranking on this business. And in Gray Malin's catalog, okay, on his website, which you can see, I'll have the links to all this stuff in the show notes. He has 4,156 unique products housed in 632 collections. Okay. 93% of the catalog is photography. In just about every photo he does, it comes in 221 different variants: size, frame, glass, color, various different items, various different things. It is so totally worth checking out a site of an individual photographer that has grown just a massive, massive business. And you look at his price, like, what do I always say? You have to have a range of prices, right? And on his site, he's got everything from $20 puzzles, okay, at the very, very floor, I think, of the business. I think $20 was the cheapest that we found, up to $199, and you can get a print, $4,000 in the middle range, $8,000 up to $12,000 triptychs, right? So he goes, $25 puzzle, $4,000 print, $8,000 up at the higher end, $12,000 triptychs, and they can all be the same image, multiple different price points. Right? The bottom rung of the ladder is the typical merch, what you guys hear me talk about all the time. The bottom rung of the ladder are the simple, cheap, and easy, dopamine hit, buy it on a whim, don't have to talk to my significant other, non-wall art related things. And then he goes all the way up to super high-end triptychs. And I'm not sure if he's got originals in a different way that he does it. I'm sure he probably does, or limited editions, but this is just what my scan returned. That's a photographer. Let's talk about an artist, okay? And an artist I love to talk about too, which is Wyland, right? The Marine Michelangelo. And Wyland's like 30 plus years in. And, for those that don't know Wyland, he's usually called the whale guy, right? The Marine Michelangelo. I think the New York Times or one of those papers, magazines called him that. But he's, I think, at 100 plus life-size whale murals, what he calls the whaling walls, that are, just essentially public art billboards that are all over the place. I think he's got 10 galleries. Laguna Beach, just down the road from me, one of his first. Lake Tahoe, Key West, which is his flagship. He's got one in Lahaina, Honolulu, Waikiki, Vegas, Epcot. I think he's got one in Hilton, Orlando, and Key West, Sarasota, so all over Florida. His site map, I found 972 products, okay, 972 products, 65 different categories, 45 different mediums. There's 45 different formats per image. G-clay canvas, G-clay paper, original oil, bronze sculpture, lucite, Sumi surfboards, aluminum prints. And, he's got an originals pricing ladder from $7,500 for an original, which is like the floor. Then he goes up to $20,590, $39,000, $74,000. And then his ceiling is at like $317,000, I believe, for his originals, at least what's on the site. And, Wyland's got like a really, really interesting story too, because from his own book in 2021, he's pretty much states that Wyland's galleries have increased the price of originals 10% the first day of every year. And the only time he didn't do that was in like the peak of the recession. I don't know if that was like a year or 2 years or what, but he's pretty much been on a self-documented 10%, okay, per year escalator for 30 years. And that's not luck, right? That's just an absolute discipline to, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue raising the price of my originals, which is going to continue to sell everything downstream. So you have two of the most successful artists, and I think Wyland does even better than Gray Malin by some margin. And you have so much that you can learn, right, by looking at either one of those two businesses. And one is only 16 years in and the other is 30 plus. One launched in a recession. One holds prices through a recession. Different mediums, but it's the same machine. It is the same machine the two of these masters right now anyway are running. It's the same image at every price point. The same image at every price point on a number of different mediums, including non-wall art related mediums. Here are two of the best-selling artists, an artist and a photographer in the United States, that are taking a number of originals that many of you have already created, okay? And they are now having 972 different products and 4,156 unique products with the same amount of images that you yourself have currently. And all of that is something that you can do instantaneously with print on demand. It's that simple. It's literally that simple. Here you have two extremely mature businesses from two world famous artists that are leveraging POD to go from small, tiny little offerings to full-blown gallery-esque shops where the entire shop, all the rows, all the lanes are filled with their products based on the same amount of original work that you guys have already created. That is the unlock of POD. That is how tremendous POD is, right? I mean, it's just, it's massive. It is just an absolutely massive point. And I think like I've gone over this a ton and I've talked about it a ton, but I haven't necessarily tied it down to some of the biggest and most mature art and photography business that exist in the United States today, right? And you could, for that matter, you could likely say it exists all over the world. And it is these fundamental things where you start with your artwork and you go from having 7 to 10 to 15 to 20 pieces, 30 pieces, maybe some of you have 50, maybe some of you have 200, and you can turn it into 2,000 overnight. And you look at the two ways that these two masters do it, and I mean, it's simple. It's exactly what I've been teaching on here and exactly what I say. Like, you know, the bottom of the price ladder is that simple sample. It's that $25 puzzle, right? It's Wyland's entry-level G. Clay or one of his books or his greeting cards or all the millions of things that he's got in there. And he goes all the way up to the 317,930 original, right? It's the same image, every price point. That's the engine. That's the engine, right? Like most artists and photographers are failing to grasp that their catalog is just basically number of images that they have, right? Masters know that their catalog is N, the number of images, times M, the mediums, times P sizes, and then you get an actual SKU count, which just gets absolutely crazy, right? And, you know, like in Malin's case, like I think 20 of his most famous photos times 221 variants equals the 4,000 SKUs, right? And Wyland, like you know, a limited image set times 45 mediums times all the multiples is his 972 SKUs. And without POD, this would have been impossible. Without POD, this is impossible. With print on demand, you are capable of unlocking, without coming out of your pocket, a dime, a similar lineup, okay, that the greatest selling art businesses in the United States have. Right? And that's insane. Like that's absolutely amazing. And one of the common misconceptions, and I'll harp on the whole, if you sell knives from me door to door, like you guys do not sell JPEGs. You do not sell JPEGs. Okay? That you really have to come to terms with that. Non-creative types, i.e. me, i.e. who you are trying to sell to, do not have your visual ability to perceive value based on a JPEG. It just doesn't work. What is a JPEG? It's the image format, the digital image format in which you're showing your work everywhere when you're not doing it in person. Websites, socials, emails, anywhere that is being seen on a computer or a screen, right? Like human beings need to see that you have real physical products in various different sizes, various different shapes, various different textures, various different frames, different lighting, different angles. We buy things based on visualization, okay? POD unlocks a level of visualization that you otherwise would have never been able to have, right? Just absolutely never. And I'm going to come back to the samples in a second. But the important thing here, and I realize, right? Like, while it always makes sense to study the masters in any business, there's always a ton that we can glean from them. Obviously, I'm making a huge point about POD. I could make huge points about the other aspects of their business, but we'll save some of those for future topics. But I get the pushback that I'm going to get from so many of you, which is like, okay, great, Patrick, you just cherry-picked two of the superstars in our industry. How do you expect me to get there? I'm just starting out. I don't have the time to spend that they did. I have a day job. I have a significant other, kids. I've got a mortgage, and I totally get that. So what's awesome, okay, is I look back in my archive and I realize I interviewed an artist not too long ago that is on this exact same path, right? And the loyal listeners will remember this podcast has had a few different chapters, vintages, if you like, to tie back to the last one. we started out hardcore tactical marketing. Then during COVID, the playbook went out the window and it was like a bunch of live broadcasts that Nick and I did. Then it was back to tactical again. Then it was on to artist interviews, and we did a huge artist interview series, right? A ton of different series, right? Over the years. But I started this episode out with, remember the $141,500 painting in a Texas town of 87 people that I teased at the top. So a few episodes back, I did an interview with John Lowry. He calls himself Humble Donkey Studio. Okay. He has a gallery, and I'm going to put this in the show notes. You all have to watch it. Hopefully I'll pique your interest enough now to actually go back and watch it. It was a Zoom in which he was in his gallery. His gallery, okay, Humble Donkey Studios, is in Round Top, Texas, population 87. It's 1 square mile. It sits between Austin and Houston. It's a little bit of like a road trip, touristy kind of a destination, right? And so I sat down with him in that gallery. I think this was July of 2024 when I was doing the artist episodes, and he tells his story, right? And I realized here's a guy that's completely on the path from both of those legendary masters in Gray Malin and in Wyland, and he's totally on the path. John started his story about how he started out in a 400 square foot log cabin, $750 a month, right? He started with just a shoestring budget, and he just hoped people would like it. And 8 years later for him, do you see how small these time frames that I keep referencing? 8 years later, right? It's never 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, right? It's 30 years in Wyland's case. It's 16 years in Gray Malin's case. It's 8 years in John Lowry and Humble Donkey Studios' case. Not 6 months, not a year, not 3 years, not 4 years, right? It takes a couple of years to get the business humming, but they all start with the same humble, simple beginning, right? 8 years later, John's well over $1 million in lifetime sales. He's already put $100,000 more than that now because it's well passed through his art storefront store. And he's running the exact same machine that Wyland is. He's running the exact same machine that Gray Malin is in a 1 square mile town, population 87, right? And, you listen to that interview with John and all of the themes, all of the things that those two guys have that print on demand has and unlocks. He's doing the same thing, right? Here's my $5,000 original. I know you can't afford this one, but don't worry. Here in this shop, I have an identical version of it framed for a fraction of the cost, right? And throughout this entire episode with John, he is showing all of these various different examples of all of the things that he has in his gallery and how he prices them and where he houses the originals and where he houses the prints and the greeting cards and the clothing and everything that he's expanded to. And all of that is possible for just hanging a shingle in the first place and going for it and getting started, right? No different than it was for Wyland launching his gallery. No different it was when Gray Malin going and selling in the farmer's market and then eventually launching his site. In the takeaway in all of this is there is a playbook here. Okay. You can have a physical gallery. You can not have a physical gallery. You can go and do in-person fairs and shows. You can not go do in-person fairs and shows. But one thing that you cannot ignore, that you need to stop ignoring at your peril, is not leveraging print on demand to give yourself this width and breadth in your lining, in your price up and pricing lineup. When I talked to John, he talked about this painting, the original that he sold for $141,000. And I think since then, or during the time of the interview, he said he sold $60,000 in reproductions for that same image that he sold the original for $141,000. And there's just nothing better than that. That's the dream, right? That is what is possible. Same image, sold the original, sold reproductions, still selling reproductions. That's Gray Malin's 221 variants and Wyland's 45 mediums playing out at a studio scale in a much smaller studio gallery in Round Top, Texas. Same image, every price point, right? Same image, every price point. And I think in John's case, the year where I interviewed him, so this would have been, again, was it 2024? Yeah, 2024. He did 100,000 in originals and probably another 200,000 in his reproductions, not counting his merch, right? And it's everything that I talk about that can come in play. You don't care where they come in on the range, right? You don't care if they come in at the low end or the high end. You'd prefer they come in at the high end, but you just want them to come in and leave with something, right? leave with something, and then off you go. And, as I was deep diving Gray Malin's story and John's are similar, right? By just putting themselves out there, by having their lineup completely dialed in with POD, the opportunities start coming to him. In John's case, which was great from the episode, he had somebody come through his gallery, and who knows if they bought something or didn't buy something, but they found him, and it was a representative from Buc-ee's. And Buc-ee's is like this cult classic Roadhouse Texas gas station that's like an institution. It's like a meme on the internet. People absolutely love it. I've been into a couple of them. It's really just a giant convenience store gas station. I don't really quite get it. Actually, I do, because I think it's hilarious. But he got into a bunch of Buc-ee's, right? What else about POD? John had a hotel call him. He talks about this in the interview too. And they wanted to, it was Texas A&M, right? That's what it was. It was Texas A&M, and they wanted to put a bunch of his art in a hotel, and they wanted originals, but his originals didn't fit. And he's like, don't worry about it. I can hit all of those sizes. Here we go. POD took care of that order. It was a $20,000 sale. The range, the fact that he could offer in these different sizes, boom, he unlocked the deal, right? So you have to have POD. All of the best-selling artists are using POD. You need to be using POD. The fact that you can open up this much merchandise, like literally, even in just an instant, is just absolutely staggering, right? I think about like where were these classes? Where were these classes? Why were these things never taught, right? And I'll tell you what the reason is. The reason it was never taught in art school, that you didn't just need to study the masters for the history of the craft, but you should have studied the masters for the business side of the craft. And the only thing that I'm left with is that nobody ever taught the teachers. Very few of the teachers ever sold art themselves. What is that line? If you can't do, teach. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I know it's not the case with every art professor or every photography school professor. And I think like art and photography schools and business success have just never been all that aligned. It's a shame. It's why this podcast exists. I remember when Brooks, the Brooks Institute closed, which was like a really famous high-end photography school here in California. I had a couple of buddies that went to it. I think it was in Santa Barbara somewhere around there. One of the most famous photography schools in America for sure. And, generations went there, learned light, composition, exposure, medium format, framing, the history, the classics. I have to imagine zero. Not a single solitary learned how to deconstruct a $25 million art business. Now, Brooks went out of business in 2016, and you can argue that was completely down to the fact that film was transitioning to digital, and digital was a kill shot. But I bet you a ton of the reason that school closed is because no one was ever taught that you have to study the masters in business, right? You have to study. Where was the Art 401? Deconstructing a living $25 million artist named Gray Malin, named Wyland, right? Or a much smaller one named John Lowry. That's a class that should have existed. Here's the syllabus. Pull up their sitemap, count their SKUs, see what language they use. SKUs are just like the numbers that you use on an e-commerce site. Map their price ladder from floor to ceiling and see what their range is. What are the breakpoints? Inventory their gallery footprint and their public art footprint. Read their story. What can you learn about them? How are they visualizing their art on their website? Order one of their cheapest items and see what your customer should see. Get on their email list and see about their emailing frequency. That will blow some of your minds if you do that. Follow them on their socials and look at their posting volume. See what kind of engagement they're getting. Like, where the heck was that class? How valuable that class could have been for some of those best-selling artists, back in the day. But what we just did right there, like if that was the syllabus for Art 401, deconstructing a living $25 million artist, like anyone can do that today right now. You can go and do everything that I just said in there and see all of that, and you'll be like, okay. I totally get this, right? I totally understand that there are some ways that I am approaching my business that is keeping me in the hobbyist lane. And there are some ways that I should be approaching my business that will have me in the art business, photography business lane. I cannot afford to ignore these things that are so critically important about the way the masters do it. I do not have to copy or completely mimic everything that they do, but I should steal the best of what they're doing and bolt it into my business, because that seems to be what's working out there. And you guys wonder why, like at our storefronts, we take art print on demand so seriously and make it so easy, because we know how important it is to an art business. You need to be able to hit the ground running. The minute you upload your images, you go from having just an original to having a veritable cornucopia of SKUs for your artistic creations, right? None of which you have to keep in inventory. None. Yes, all the prints imaginable, but yes, also a bevy of different merch items depending on what you pick. And all of that is done in a matter of hours. And that is like such an insane takeaway. And I was like thinking visually in my mind as I was like preparing for this, that imagine you had one of those retail stores. John's retail store, if you go back and look at that episode, it's really cool. It's like this in barn. John's or one of Wyland's galleries, or I don't think Gray Malin does. I think Gray Malin's just all online. But imagine you had one of those stores and it was like, okay, fill it. Get all the racks, get all the knickknacks, get all the bric-a-brac, get all the displays and the end caps, however you're going to do it, however you're going to light it, however you're going to hang it. Like the thought of all of that and how daunting that is like terrifying in and of its own, let alone like how much money that would all cost, right? In the brilliance, the brilliance of POD is that you snap your fingers and it's like the entire store, that entire gallery is instantaneously populated with your creations in various different price points and various different sizes. And it made me think back to like, there was this clothing brand and I had to go Google whether it was still around, and it turns out it is. But it was called Bonobos, okay? And they sort of like came to or burst onto the scene by like, apparently like the designers just spent an inordinate amount of time making a pant fit. And they had a better pant fit than anything else. And I don't know if that was all marketing, but for me, I've got a skinny frame with big legs and those pants just fit me like a glove. I don't know what it was. So I ended up buying a bunch from them back today. And the brand kept growing and growing and growing. And they did this really cool model, which I thought was really, really interesting, wherein they started getting, they expanded into all menswear. They weren't just doing pants in the end, but they expanded into retail. Okay. And they did retail in like a really interesting way. They would have a retail store, and inside of the retail store, all of the clothes would be in there that you could try on in the various different sizes. But you would go in there, you would try everything on, look in the mirror, the normal clothing store buying experience. And then the salesperson would just be taking your order on an iPad through their website. And so you would check out, you'd hand them a credit card, no cash register, none of that. They would email you the receipt, kind of like they do at the Apple store, right? And that's it. You'd leave. And it was annoying that you didn't get to leave with your clothes, but it was awesome because, well, it was awesome for them because it was basically like you knew it to be an e-commerce brand, but it was an e-commerce brand that was able to keep their costs down in retail by just showing you the clothes and then shipping you the sample after the fact. It's like essentially the clothing version of print on demand. They didn't have to warehouse it. They didn't have it right there. It was like you order, it's going to get shipped, a different way. It's totally the clothing version of POD. Anyway, they sold to Walmart. Walmart sold them to another person. The founders left. And I think the brand is like maybe in and out of bankruptcy. Doesn't matter. It's another fantastic use case where like this notion of POD can be so incredibly strong. And one of the things that I used to do all the time, and one of the things that like I rammed down my customer's throat, like, I don't even know, 3 years ago now, which is why this is a classic and coming back. You have to have samples. You don't sell JPEGs, right? That means you, the artist, the photographer, the creative, yes, you need to be leveraging POD, okay? Yes, it will be amazing the minute you get it spun up because then your entire website is going to have all these incredible items like the masters do. But you also have to have samples, okay? And what I've usually done to sell this on video is you have a fine art paper, you have a canvas, you have metal, you have acrylic, and you have wood, okay? And even if you think one of those mediums is perfect for you and one of those mediums is not, is irrelevant, okay? You get a tiny little stack, and I'm looking at it as I'm recording this because I have it in my little like credenza thing over here to the left because I used to do show and tell with this all the time. You have to be able to show us human beings, going back to the if you were knocking on the door, try to sell knives, what would you have? Knives. You have to have the samples so that you can show them off. You don't have to have 20 of them, but you have to have them. You can do tiny little ones. I mean, I did like the smallest basically that I could get away with. They're like 4 inches by 6 inches or 5 inches by 7 inches, or maybe tops like 8 inches by 4 inches, whatever the proportion that your work is. You need one of those for every single solitary media type. Okay? You need one for fine art paper in a frame. You need one for canvas. You need one for acrylic. You need one for metal. I like having them tiny and extremely small because they're very easy to show off on video. I like having that stack be tiny and very small because it's very easy to carry it with you. I like them being tiny and easy to stack and small so that they can be in your car everywhere you go. Literally everywhere you go. Every time you visit a client in person, every time you're interacting in a conversation about your art, anytime that you can conjure an excuse to bring them out and discuss them, you need to be doing that. Because no one knows the difference, okay? The normal consumer does not know the difference between what a fine art paper looks like, whether it's gloss or matte, whether it's textured or smooth. No one knows what a gallery wrapped canvas looks like. No one knows the difference between acrylic and metal and how it's meant to hang on the wall and whether it needs a frame or if it doesn't need a frame and the sheen on it. And no one even really knows that you can print on wood and it looks incredible. And having the samples, I mean, by a show of hands, and this is an audio podcast, so obviously I'm not going to be able to get very good feedback on this. How many of you have your work in every media type that you sell it on, in merch, and every merch type that you sell it on, with you, on your person, in your car, in your studio, such that you can show and articulate the difference between various different products that you sell, right? Gray Malin doesn't have an in-person gallery. Wyland does. John does. John can show all of those things off. Great. I mean, Wyland can show all of those things off. And so can John. Gray, I guess, less so. But guarantee you, anytime he's doing any media event, anything, he has the ability to show all of this stuff in person. You have to be able to articulate what it is that you guys sell. You do not sell JPEGs. Okay? You don't sell JPEGs. Get samples. Order them. Have them with you at all times. Take them every time that you are making a sale. Use them when you can if you're doing an upsell. Be able to articulate what it is, the products that you sell, such that us, your prospective buyers, can hold these things in our hot little hands and understand what they are and be really excited about them. Okay? Which brings me back to the $141,500 painting sold in Round Top, Texas. I just love that story. John sold it once, then he sold $60,000, probably more than that now, more in reproductions of the exact same image. That's what we just spent 40 minutes on. That dream right there. Why do you need to get your artwork photographed? That right there. Why do you need to do POD? That right there. You guys have the potential, every one of you, to hit a home run with one of your images, where there can be such demand for it that you can sell an original at a high ticket and you can be selling reproductions of it forever. So POD and samples are not two topics. They are one engine. Same image, every price point. Same image, every price point. Study the masters, run the engine, order the samples. Bring the knives when you knock on that door. Print on demand, you guys, unlocks your pricing ladder. It gives you a lineup that is 20x of what a normal artist business might have out of the gates. All you got to do is put it to work for you. Thanks for listening. Leave me a review or feedback. 5 stars. 5 stars. Leave me a comment if you're getting good insights, entertainment, and education out of it. And as always, have a great day.